Call of Duty Vanguard was released in 2021 and is the 18th installment in the Call of Duty franchise. Developed by Sledgehammer Games, it's part of the annual release schedule of COD games, coming out a year after Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. In the multiplayer section of Cold War, there was a storyline where one of the characters mentions creating a new group to combat continuing Nazi and other threats around the world. This is the story of the creation of that group. I played Vanguard on the Xbox Series X, but it's also available on the Xbox One, the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 5, and PC. If you're liking the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content.
Would you look at that?
Hell of a world! Who's up for saving it?
Let's dive right into the story, the setting, and the characters. Vanguard takes place in World War II across multiple different years. This is accomplished through a main storyline taking place in 1945 in both Hamburg and Berlin during the last moments of the Third Reich, when the Soviets are pushing in from the east and the Allies are coming from the west. But there's also multiple flashbacks to provide backgrounds for the four main characters. I found the storyline actually resembles the movie Inglourious Basterds, where a group of people all have to come together with a single purpose of stopping the Nazi war machine. You have Arthur, a paratrooper from Britain who landed in Normandy on D-Day, Polina, a Soviet sniper who lost her family during the attack on Stalingrad, Wade, an ace American pilot, and Lucas, an Australian who isn't big on authority. Immediately, a story set in World War II feels familiar to longtime fans of the series, but there is a few things that are different. Namely, they play pretty fast and loose with the historical accuracy. This is a COD game, and you shouldn't expect it to be faithful to the time period. There are gun parts that didn't exist in the time period, people having fought in places that didn't happen in the real history, and they changed a lot of the conflicts to make it more thrilling. This isn't a massive complaint regarding the story, it is a fictional video game. It's just that, for a game that takes liberties in certain areas, I almost would have expected them to go even further, maybe take massive risks with the stories. Instead, they play it very safe. Take the characters, for example. The four main characters each come from a different country and take a typical archetype of a war story. You have the no-nonsense British Army officer, Arthur, who takes charge and leads the company. His story is told in a flashback where you drop into Normandy before D-Day in order to clear some of the artillery prior to the landings. Your drop goes wrong, a lot of people die, and you have to kill your way through an army of Germans and destroy these artillery guns. It feels very much like a Band of Brothers episode, with a few minor changes. Then you have Polina, the Soviet sniper whose story of the Battle of Stalingrad is very similar to the movie Enemy at the Gates, where you have snipers fighting through Stalingrad. Polina also has the most generic and bland dialogue you will ever hear. She hates Nazis and makes it very clear many times in the story.
Do we understand the plan?
I shoot Nazis. They die. That's my plan.
Wade, the American, is like a cowboy pilot who doesn't like to follow the rules of air combat like formations and all that kind of stuff. He's an ace, and you know that he's an ace because he says it and a bunch of other people say it as well. His flashbacks take place in the Pacific Theater of War, particularly the Battle of Midway, and features controls for flying that are simply terrible. I mean, they are objectively bad. In a later mission, he's shot down, and you need to fight your way through the jungle to reach your co-pilot, only to get captured by the Japanese. Finally, you have Lucas, the Australian, participate in the African campaign against Rommel, and he hated his commander, which is like a running theme. Each character fits into their type perfectly, but the flashbacks that happen during the main storyline make it jarring and confusing to keep track what exactly is happening here, which is saying something because the campaign is only 4 or 5 hours long, so it should be easy to keep track of. So let's go through the campaign together. The game starts with 6 people, the 4 main characters and 2 extras, assaulting a train that's traveling to Hamburg. They're part of this elite group of soldiers that are trying to find documentation and intel on a Nazi Project Phoenix. They don't know the specifics of what that project is, they just need details about it. After killing their way through the train in a visually stunning and fun section, they arrive at a German U-boat base where they fight their way through a hangar and into the sub, only to get captured. From that point on, the game takes place in a prison cell in Berlin during the Soviet assault on the city. There's this German officer named Richter who's trying to interrogate them for more information. As he does so, the story jumps to different times of the war for each of the characters to give them background. I think the story would have flowed better if they had done all the flashbacks first, before the assault on the train. That way it would be fresh in our heads when they are captured. Jumping back and forth between present and the past does lessen the story. When the main campaign ends, and this is a minor spoiler, they discover a trove of intelligence that would have been used to found this Fourth Reich. With that information, they launch attacks on the facilities all over the world, which leads to the events of the multiplayer campaign. The multiplayer isn't really this continuation of the main campaign, it's really just an excuse to get people fighting in a bunch of different exotic locations. But in the main campaign, there is one interesting piece of intel. Polina discovers this document that hints that the zombie campaign story is canon, not just taking place in an alternate reality, but actually taking place in their world. This was probably intended to be like an inside joke, Easter egg sort of thing, like, hey, zombies are real, look at these wacky Nazis are up to now, up to their old hijinks. But it does feel sort of out of place. The zombie campaign is incredibly short and is barely a story. Basically, a high-ranking member of the Nazi party used this ritual to form a connection with a demon and bring back the dead. To counter this, the main characters in the zombie storyline use other connections with other demons who are in opposition to fight against the Nazis. We'll talk about the zombie campaign in the gameplay section, but it's not really a storyline when you compare it to the previous COD titles like Cold War. It really just boils down to a few pieces of dialogue at the beginning and the end of each map. Those maps are recycled from multiplayer and the campaign, and they just threw zombies in them. Speaking of gameplay, let's talk about that. It's still a first-person shooter, but the guns come from the World War II era. Well, let's just say they're supposed to come from that era, but there's a bunch of different parts added to them from different timelines. So don't expect complete historical accuracy. I will say the shooting felt great, the weapons hit hard, and they sound good, while movement speed does feel a little bit slower than Cold War. One addition to the combat that I loved is the way the scopes work. In the past, the scope would take up a lot of the screen, and there would be this delay in aiming, and your vision would be reduced to this small circle. Vanguard fixed this problem. The scope snaps and zooms in, but you can still see the area around it. I avoided anything in the previous games other than iron sights and reflex sights, but in Vanguard, I could use the scope without a lot of penalty or difficulty. Going into campaign, you play as 4 different characters, and they all play pretty similar, but they do have different abilities. Arthur can command his allies to attack a target, Polina can climb objects or crawl under desks and stuff, Wade can see through walls for a short period of time, that sort of thing. It shakes things up without being overpowered. But the campaign itself is on rails with a lot of scripted sections. That means there are usually only one path forward and one way of playing it. Like I said before, the campaign is only 4 to 6 hours long, depending on your playstyle and the difficulty you choose. It isn't hard on the regular difficulty, and even though you're going to die a few times, that's usually because you're stuck in a section that poorly explains what exactly you're supposed to do here. For multiplayer, there's a lot less modes offered than, say, Cold War. They've reduced the game modes to just the essentials like deathmatch, free-for-all, capture points, things like that. Kill times are about the same, but I found the movement speed much lower. But it's zombies that suffered the most in this release. There are only 4 missions, and they aren't great or unique. Of those 4 missions, they only use 3 different maps. The first 2 majorly take place in this small hub area where you prepare your character and then you jump through portals to accomplish small gameplay sections, like eliminate all the enemies, gather materials or capture points, then travel back to the hub. Repeat that over and over again until you get to the ending where you'll exfil. The third map takes place in a swamp, and this one is the classic survive in a small area that gradually opens up more of the map as you get better weapons. There's a bit of a mystery to solve in this map in order to beat it. It's not just escape the map at the end. My problem with the swamp map was that everything was really spread out. You would need to constantly run around to collect upgrades or visit the various tool shops and things. So if you're playing with other people, it's easy to get separated. The last mission repeats on the same desert map as the second mission, this time with areas blocked by unlockable gates rather than the portals from the hub to go through. Overall, I thought Zombies was a big miss in Vanguard. There's fun to be had here for sure, but not on the same degree as previous titles.
Alright, this is it. You know the drill. Stand up! Hook in! Stand by! See you on the ground!
Graphically, Vanguard is the best looking COD game I've played so far. It lacks that gritty, realistic looking characters from Cold War. Everyone looks really clean and pretty, but the environments are really insane. The set pieces here, like Hamburg and Berlin and some of the other locations you travel to, look incredible. The frame rate was a steady 60 FPS, but it does suffer from blurriness unless you activate Fidelity FZ, which really brings out the details back into the environment. The only slowdowns I had were in multiplayer, where it was frequently laggy, but that was network issues rather than the graphics. Moving on to audio, the voice acting is great, but again, the dialogue is bad and cliche. Any problems with the characters come from the writing and not the voice acting.
Phoenix, we must be close.
Not for long. Krauts are moving their stash onto a sub. See that lot lugging that chest? I bet you London to a brick. That is what we're after.
So what are we waiting for?
Time to bring the heavy stuff. Now we're talking.
Wait. We can't go in loud.
So that brings us to the conclusion. I'm going to give a rundown of the pros and cons of Vanguard. First, for the pros, Vanguard looks incredible. The main campaign has some of the great set pieces and moments, like the fall of Berlin and the bombing of Hamburg. The gameplay was fun and engaging, with guns having a great feel. I could actually find matches for zombies in multiplayer. Now the cons. Zombie mode was lackluster. Multiplayer modes have been significantly reduced compared to Cold War. The main campaign is short, clocking in at only 4 to 6 hours. Character dialogue needed a complete rewrite, especially Polina's dialogue. The game is over 100 gigabytes to download onto the Xbox Series X. Everyone on multiplayer should automatically be muted. I don't know why every match I played had kids yelling into their microphone constantly. And that's my review for Call of Duty Vanguard. Overall, I rated a 7.5 out of 10, provided you pick it up on sale. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.